pleasure to be here today. I love Prague. I've been here. This is my third time now, and I will come back. It's a beautiful city, and I really enjoy being here. I work in user experience. I run a pretty large group, part of about 150 different UX people. But I also work within a market research company, a very large market research company of about 13,000 people. And it's a German company called GfK. Maybe some of you might know of GfK. But one of the things that I constantly come up against is how user experience really fits within a market research company. At some level, it's pretty obvious. At the front end of innovation, UX is very important, right? It's important to be able to piece together how the user experience fits together with the whole market research angle. But at the other end of the spectrum, at the brand end of the spectrum, what really does user experience have to say? So I've been thinking a lot about user experience and how it relates to brand. So let me tell you a story. How many of you, does anybody here own a Ford? Yeah, this is Skoda country. So Ford, okay. So the market research people at Ford were all excited because they did some research and discovered that 40% of the people who buy the car based upon the technology that's in the car. This is really great because now we just have to we have to understand what's important in that technology, and we just throw it all in the car and people will buy the car. All right? That's the theory. The problem here was that they put all the technology in, but they didn't figure out how to put it together in such a way that people could use it. So they got themselves in trouble because they discovered that once they put everything in there, the dealers had a hard time because people kept coming back, and they wound up having to pay the dealerships $50 per car sold for the dealers to train the new purchasers of the vehicle how to use the in-car navigation system called My Ford Touch. So if you're familiar with Ford and you've seen the My Ford Touch control system, $50 per car sold, and I'm actually underplaying that. In some cases, it was up to $75 per car sold. And knowing that they sold several 100,000 of these vehicles, you can start to add up the amount of time, the amount of money that it actually cost Ford in order to put this on the market. So what does this really mean? When it was released into the market and they had to do they got the reviews, these were the kind of reviews that they got. Why the My Ford Touch control system stinks. My Ford Touch, cutting edge, or just too complicated. These were not the kinds of headlines that Ford wanted to hear. In fact, Ford went from number 5 on the J.D. Power Initial Quality Survey down to number 23 on the Initial Quality Survey. That was not what Ford wanted to hear. So in essence, what did we find? That poor user experience, in effect, crushed the Ford brand. They have since recovered from this. They're doing much better. But this was a few years ago. It's all publicly available. So if you want a really good UX story to tell, go out and find this particular story, and there's some really great information. In fact, I've underplayed it a little bit because there's some really good stories. Do you know how they fixed it? They actually went back, they did all of the human factors work they needed to do, and they sent a USB stick out to all of the owners of this system. And you had to go out, start your car, plug the USB system in, and wait for an hour while it updated. Really amazing story. Anyway, so why does this happen, right? We spend all sorts of time figuring out what needs to go in, but sometimes we don't figure out how to put it together. That seems to be pretty obvious. So I have to ask, do those of you who are designers, do you get up every morning and say, I think I'm going to make things just a little bit harder for those users today? No, that's really not how it works. I have another question for you. Who believes that companies set out to deliver bad user experiences? No, again, we don't want to do that. But if nobody really sets out to design bad user experiences, why do we have so many bad experiences out in the market? Well, just everybody needs a 2x2 graph in a presentation. So here's my 2x2 graph in this case. So you have your benefits. So you want to have benefits, right? Benefits are features. You want to have lots of really good features. And you also want to create that experience, that positive experience at the high end or poor experience. Where we want to be is in the northeast. Where we wind up is oftentimes we got too much stuff and it winds up being a poor experience based upon poor design. I want to pivot now. So I've talked a little bit about the user experience, but let's talk about brand. When we talk about brand, what is brand? Do we have any brand people here today? Oh, it's always better when I don't have brand people here, because then I can say anything I want and nobody can challenge me. So it's good. Okay, so what is brand? Well, if we look at the textbook definition of brand, a brand is a name, term, icon, jingle, song, whatever, that associates the brand with some positive attributes, some positive benefits. In this case, it also helps distinguish one from another, right? One thing from another. Well, why do we create brands? Why do we spend so much time worrying about the brand itself? Well, it's pretty obvious. If Nike were to create another shoe, they just stamp Nike on it, and it becomes a premium product, right? So it creates awareness, it creates association. The benefit that you create through the quality of that item actually becomes a value. The brand itself has a value that you can attach to other things. When Apple releases a self-driving car, there are going to be a lot of people going to an Apple self-driving car. 10 years ago, nobody would trust Apple to make a car, right? But now they're able to expand their category. Google, the same thing, for that matter. So this is why we create brands. But the real question is, why do people stay with brands where they've had poor experiences? Why do people stay with brands where they've had poor experiences? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. You might stay simply because it's less expensive. If you want to switch from one bank to another or switch from one telecom provider to another, the incremental benefit might not be worth the pain that it takes to move from one to another. So you're just willing to stay with a poor experience. There's a lot of reasons why we stay with a bad experience. And those of you who love Apple, right? It is a nice experience, but I'll just say one word: iTunes, right? Spend a lot of time at iTunes, and you may, if that's where you started with an Apple product, you might not stay with an Apple product. And this is one thing, I stay with, I have an iPhone. I have two, actually. But 4 out of the first Apple products I ever bought, I had to return because they were defective. So my initial experience hasn't been the same, but I stick with it because it may be just a little better than lots of other things that are out there. Why do people leave brands where they've had good experiences? Interesting question, too, because it may be price, there may be a lot of things that will keep people into a brand where they've had bad experiences. So all of this is to sum up and sort of talk about what's the relationship between experience, brand perception. When we experience a product or when we experience that brand, whether it's in advertising or whether it's in the actual product itself. And this is the only math on the whole presentation. Brand experience or brand perception is actually of a product is the sum total of all the experiences. And we know that some of those experiences are good or average, and some can be very painful at times. So we want to be very careful about the experiences that we produce, because if we're designing a user interface, it can often have a negative impact, but it can have a positive impact as well. But from a UX point of view, all of this is to say the following, and this is what pains me, because being in user experience, I want everything to be about the user experience. But everything about the brand perception, when we think about brand perception, it's not all about the user experience. In fact, the user experience is a delivery on that brand promise. So if you get nothing else from today, if you are in user experience, what you are doing is actually delivering the product that the brand people are selling. It is a delivery on the brand promise. And when we talk about user experience, it's not just, or we talk about the brand experience, sorry. It's not all about the website or the digital design. It's the entire experience. It's the experience from ordering. It's the experience from the social media that's heard. It's the experience about how the product is delivered, unpackaged. I just bought an Amazon Echo. It was a beautiful thing. I don't know, do you know Echo? Have you seen Echo? It's a tower. It looks just like a small cylinder, and it's a voice control for Amazon. And it took me 2 minutes from the time that I opened the box to set it up to connect it to my network. And the hardest part was finding my Wi-Fi key. And I knew somebody at Amazon, and I emailed him, and I said, this was incredible. You guys did a great job. And he goes, it finally got to the guy who did the work, and he said, yes, it took us 1 year to go from 30 minutes to 2 minutes. That's how long they spent on getting the unboxing experience and the out-of-box experience correct, precise, and to be so slick. Because what's the alternative? The alternative, people get it home, they're frustrated, they send it back. And now they have a warehouse full of Echoes that work but are unusable. All right, so let's talk about building brand. This is where it gets interesting, in my opinion. When we talk about building brand, there are a couple of different terms to note. Paid media and owned media. Paid media, when you go out and you put up a billboard. I bought that space, I put my brand up there, I tell you how great I am, right? Digital media, you can put it, you can buy a media buy on a mobile device, a media buy in lots of different places. Right, this is paid media. And I, as the brand owner, control that space. I control that message. All right? But now we sort of move over into owned. These are places where, as a marketer, I control it, or I partially control it. So I control what I put on my website. I control what I put out on Facebook. What I can't control is the comments that people make. So it's only partially controlled. And so these are all of the things that I can do. So as a marketer, these are my channels: paid media, owned media. There is another channel, though. But how these brands are communicating are changing, particularly because traditional media, paid media, and owned media are how it was. How it is now goes into the space of earned media. So this is what people talk about. This is what people, these are the things that I put out in the world where I don't have much control. So if I, as a producer of YouTube, can go out and create my own Coca-Cola video and put it up on YouTube, Coke doesn't control that. I control that as the user. So I don't have any, the marketer does not control that. The other space here is word of mouth, is social media. More people will buy things because of word of mouth than they will through paid media or owned media. Earned media is now the most important way to get your message out. The problem now is that marketers don't have control, of course, over earned media. So this creates a certain amount of discord, of problems for these marketers. Because traditionally your brand, you could tell people what they had to believe about your brand. So you had a brand, people would interact with that brand. Now, people talk to each other. No matter how much you tell them how good you are, they talk to each other, and I would rather listen to you than listen to the brand message that's being communicated over paid media or earned media. I travel a lot, so I go through airports. When I go through airports, I see these big signs that tell me how great SAP is. And those of you who use SAP know that that message is sometimes a very difficult one to believe as a user of SAP. And I hope nobody from SAP is here. I really do like it, just in case you. So earned media means more to the brand than ever before, right? It means everything now, because now as a marketer, I have to control that. So companies can't get away with telling users, customers, how great their experiences are. In fact, a marketer has to be able to control earned media. And so this is part of the main point here. How does a marketer influence earned media? Well, in fact, I have a physical sign here that says UX. And that's how I believe that the best interest, the best friend of a brand marketer these days is in the user experience world, because the user experience is the delivery on the brand promise. And I'm going to show you a couple of very specific examples. But mature organizations really, really understand that user experiences are brand experiences, and that they have to deliver on the user experience. Okay, we know how to measure brand. We have lots of ways to measure brand. But I want to show you how we measure user experience and how that's tied to brand. We have in my company, we have a user experience score. We call it the UX score. It has 3 separate dimensions on usability, utility, and aesthetics. It's a 10-question questionnaire. And it goes, we're able to roll all of these up so that we can understand how the user experience builds into the brand experience. The UX score allows us to measure over time, allows us to do comparisons across products, across iterations, and compare user groups. But I want to give you a couple of very specific examples. There's going to be some data in here. There's one measure of brand strength. It's called purchase intent. And purchase intent simply means how likely are you to buy that thing, okay? And I wanted to know how the usage of the product affects brand strength. And we're going to use a very simple example from bandages. So we had 3 separate bandages. We had Band-Aid, we had NextCare, and we had a generic here. These 2 are branded products. People know them fairly well. I'm not sure. I would assume maybe you'll have one of those brands. And so we just asked a simple question, 1 to 5 scale. How likely are you to buy this product? Just by looking at the boxes. Okay, so that was purchase intent before they used it. Then we had them take the bandage, put it on a finger, take the bandage off. We had them do the UX score and then do purchase intent. So they did that 3 times. And we randomized and did all the things we were supposed to do. Okay? And so here's what we have. Band-Aid. So this is purchase intent on a 1 to 5 scale, before and after. Very little difference here. Purchase intent before and after. NextCare was high. It's a branded product, so it had a high purchase intent before, and it had a low it went down on the post usage, and then generic actually went up afterward. Interesting. So then we took the UX score at the same time, and we're able to say that Band-Aid had a high purchase intent before and after, and the UX score was highest. So we've got a relationship now between the usage of the product and purchase intent. What's more, not only that, because of the decrease in NextCare, we also showed a decrease in the UX score and an increase in the UX score for the generic. User experience strongly influenced purchase intent in this particular case. So it's kind of a simple example. But those of you who work for banks, this might be the time to perk up, because we did some very interesting work here. We wanted to understand the relationship between the channels that people used. So when I interact with an ATM, I interact with a mobile app, and I interact with the website on the banking. So how does the user experience differ across these touch points? And similarly, how do these measures relate to other brand measures? In this particular case, we were looking at active brand equity. Active brand equity simply means it's the relationship between that brand, it's the premium that you're willing to pay over an unbranded product. So it's a very strong measure, actually, of brand relationship. And we looked at it, oops, went too fast. We looked at it across 4 banks, 4 major US banks: Bank of America, Chase, Citibank, and Wells Fargo. So the analysis that we did, in fact, showed very little difference, oddly enough. If you take a look at the patterns of these 3 different UX scores, so you have the total UX score, usability, usefulness, and aesthetics. It turned out that there were actually very few differences in the patterns, but there were some differences overall that when our respondents looked at it, they said, well, you know, each of these touch points is actually generally pretty usable. I think that was good news for these particular banks. But when it came to utility, or what we call usefulness, they didn't see that any of these products were unique or had a lot of utility baked into them. So, but now we start to break out and compare the banks. So I have a whole presentation on this, but I pulled out just a couple of slides. In this particular case, we wanted to compare banks. How do the banks differ? So now this is where the banks get very interested, because now we're able to look and see how the banks compare. In this case, it's just on the mobile app. And you can see that Wells Fargo, which is on the far right, would be very unhappy to know, and I don't even think they know this, would be very unhappy to know that as a general rule, their mobile app is worse than the other apps in terms of its perceived or its measured usability on the UX score. So compared to Chase, Citibank, we had a low end, so we're not really looking at that reliably in this case. Chase is seen as more usable in this case, just looking at banks. Overall, the comparison that Chase was a better bank. So we're able to separate, the whole point here is that we're able to separate the user experience on each one of these banks across each one of these touch points. But the main question is, how does it relate to brand? How does it relate to brand equity? So in this particular model, in the brand equity model, we're able to show that the relationship between brand equity, in this case, and market share is very strong. You have a correlation of almost 90%, which is an extremely tight relationship. So the higher the brand equity, the greater the market share. This is not related to this data, but I'll tie it back to this data. I just wanted to show the relationship between active brand equity and market share. When we plugged the data in that we collected from the UX score and put it into a structured equation model, we're able to relate the user experience to active brand equity very directly. So both directly and indirectly through a couple of dimensions called memorability and impression. So the UX score had a significant impact, or UX had a significant impact on active brand equity, directly and indirectly. So all of this is to get to the point. Here's the point. We are able to directly tie changes in the measurement of user experience to active brand equity. There is a direct relationship between how you're able, the usability, and the utility, and the aesthetics of the product that you develop, and how that relates to the active brand equity, which is directly related to market share. User experience is directly related to market share, is what we can say, by implication. So, closing it out, it all begins with understanding the user, not just the customer, but the user, because the user experience is the delivery on the brand promise. When we create these things in the world, that we're creating expectations. Those expectations deliver what we want to say about the brand, and deliver that in ways that are increasingly interesting and increasingly complex. Brand relationships are built through good user experience, and they're eroded through poor user experience. One of the things that we know is that advertising and marketing can amplify the success of great design. If you have a really good design, the advertising and marketing will just explode the product. However, they can rarely compensate for a poor design. Rarely compensate for a poor design. So, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you.